There's a phrase that gets repeated so often it starts to sound like a law of nature. Your network is your net worth. It's said in podcasts, business books, career advice threads, and motivational speeches, usually by people who thrive in loud rooms, who think out loud, who gain energy from constant interaction. And if you're an introvert, every time you hear it, something inside you quietly tightens. Because your lived experience tells a very different story. Networking, as it's usually taught and practiced, doesn't feel like opportunity. It feels like performance, like exhaustion disguised as strategy, like a scam you're told you must participate in or fall behind. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people won't say out loud. For introverts, traditional networking often doesn't work. Not because introverts are broken, shy, or incapable, but because the entire model is built around extroverted reward systems that have very little to do with real value, real connection, or real impact. Networking, in its popular form, is sold as connection, but what it usually demands is exposure. You're expected to show up, talk to as many people as possible, make yourself memorable in a few seconds, exchange information, follow up quickly, stay visible, stay top of mind. It rewards speed, surface-level charm, and constant availability. For introverts, this isn't just uncomfortable, it's misaligned. Introverts don't struggle with connection. They struggle with forced connection. They don't lack social skill. They lack tolerance for shallow interaction that goes nowhere. And that's the first crack in the networking myth. The system assumes that more connections automatically mean better outcomes. But introverts know, intuitively and from experience, that depth matters more than volume. When you're introverted, your energy is finite and precious. Social interaction costs you something, not because you hate people, but because you process internally. You listen deeply. You think before you speak. You pick up on nuance. This means that walking into a room full of strangers and having dozens of brief transactional conversations isn't neutral for you. It's draining, and the return on that energy investment is often shockingly low. Most networking events are optimized for visibility, not substance. People talk about what they do, not why they do it. They pitch themselves instead of revealing themselves. They're thinking about their next sentence instead of listening. Everyone is on. And introverts can feel that immediately. The noise, the posturing, the subtle competition. It doesn't feel human. It feels performative. So introverts try to adapt. They rehearse small talk. They force smiles. They push themselves to get out there. And sometimes it works on paper. They collect contacts, they add connections, they follow up. But inside, there's a growing sense of dissonance, a feeling that this isn't how real trust is built, that something essential is missing. What's missing is alignment. Networking assumes that opportunity comes from proximity, that if you're physically or socially close enough to the right people, something good will happen. But introverts often build opportunity differently. They build it through competence, through depth, through consistency, through quiet reliability. Their best opportunities don't come from rooms full of strangers. They come from being known deeply by a few people who trust them. This is why networking feels like a scam for introverts. Not because relationships don't matter, but because the version of relationships being sold is thin, noisy, and exhausting. It asks introverts to become someone else in order to succeed. And any system that requires you to abandon your nature to participate is not neutral. It's biased. Introverts don't need more connections. They need the right context for connection. One of the biggest lies in networking culture is that success comes from being seen. Introverts know, often painfully, that being seen without being understood is hollow. Visibility without substance doesn't create leverage. It creates pressure. You become known for showing up, not for what you actually do well. And this leads to another problem. Traditional networking rewards those who are good at self-promotion, not necessarily those who are good at their work. The loudest voices rise fastest. The quietest competence often gets overlooked. For introverts, this feels fundamentally unjust, not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, grinding way that erodes motivation. So many introverts internalize this and assume the problem is them. They think, I just need to try harder, be more outgoing, be more confident. But confidence isn't volume, and authenticity isn't repetition. Introverts aren't failing at networking. Networking is failing to recognize how introverts actually build trust and value. Introverts tend to form connections through shared work, not shared space. Through collaboration, not conversation for its own sake. Through time, not intensity. They don't bond instantly. They bond gradually. And when they do, those bonds are strong. This is why introverts often find that their most important relationships were never networked into existence. They emerged organically, from working together, from mutual respect, from repeated low-pressure interaction, from being useful, reliable, thoughtful. That kind of connection doesn't fit neatly into a business card exchange. Another issue with networking is that it treats people as means to an end. Even when it's polite, even when it's friendly, there's an underlying transaction. Who can help me? Who should I follow up with? Who is worth my time? Introverts are highly sensitive to this dynamic. They feel the instrumentalization immediately, and it feels wrong. Introverts don't want to be used, and they don't want to use others. They want mutuality, shared interest, genuine exchange. When networking violates that, it triggers resistance, not fear, resistance. And yet, the pressure remains. Career advice insists that if you don't network, you're sabotaging yourself, that opportunities will pass you by, that you'll be invisible. This creates a quiet anxiety in introverts, a feeling that they're choosing between authenticity and success. But that choice is false. The real problem isn't networking itself. It's the narrow definition of it. Networking has been reduced to a set of behaviors optimized for extroverted energy. Talk more, meet more, share more, be everywhere. Introverts don't operate that way. They never have. Introverts build influence through clarity, through insight, through producing work that speaks when they don't. They attract opportunities by becoming indispensable, not by being omnipresent. And here's the part that rarely gets acknowledged. Many of the people who benefit most from traditional networking don't actually create much value. They circulate, they connect, they broker. But the actual work, the thinking, the execution, is often done by quieter people behind the scenes, introverts. So when introverts are told that networking is the key to success, what they're really being told is to step into a system that undervalues their strengths and overvalues someone else's. That's why it feels like a scam. Not because relationships don't matter, but because the loud version of relationship building is not the only, or even the best, way to build a meaningful career or life. If this is resonating, it's because you felt this tension. You felt the pressure to show up in ways that drain you. You've wondered why doing the right things socially didn't translate into real opportunity. Staying connected to perspectives like this matters, because it helps you stop blaming yourself for a system that wasn't built with you in mind. And staying subscribed becomes a way of continuing to hear ideas that validate your lived experience instead of dismissing it. For introverts, the most powerful connections are often invisible at first. They're built in one-on-one conversations, in long emails, in thoughtful feedback, in being the person who listens carefully and follows through. These don't scale quickly, but they compound deeply. Traditional networking chases breadth. Introverted connection builds depth. Breadth looks impressive. Depth creates resilience. And resilience is what actually sustains opportunity over time. And this difference becomes even clearer when you look at what actually happens after most networking interactions. Business cards are exchanged, contacts are added, Messages are sent with vague promises of, "Let's stay in touch," and then nothing. The connection fades, not because anyone did something wrong, but because there was no real foundation, no shared experience, no trust built over time, no reason for the relationship to deepen beyond politeness. Introverts sense this outcome almost immediately, which is why networking feels pointless to them. They can feel, even in the moment, that the interaction is unlikely to lead anywhere meaningful. That intuition isn't pessimism, it's pattern recognition. And when you repeatedly invest energy into interactions that lead nowhere, the activity starts to feel deceptive, like effort without return, like a performance staged for appearances rather than outcomes. This is where the word scam starts to make sense emotionally, even if not literally. It's not that networking is intentionally dishonest. It's that it's oversold as universally effective, while quietly benefiting a specific personality type far more than others. Introverts are told to play a game whose rules disadvantage them, and then blamed when they don't enjoy or excel at it. Another overlooked factor is how introverts process information. Introverts don't think best while talking. They think before talking. Insight comes from reflection, synthesis, and internal dialogue. Networking environments rarely allow for this. They're fast-paced, interruptive, and noisy. There's little space to consider what someone is saying before responding. For introverts, this creates cognitive friction. You're expected to respond immediately when your strength lies in depth, not speed. So introverts often leave networking events feeling like they didn't show up as themselves, not because they lied, but because the environment didn't allow their real strengths to surface. This creates a subtle erosion of confidence over time. You start believing that you're not good at people, when in reality, you're just not good at shallow, rapid-fire social performance. And that distinction matters, because introverts are often exceptional at relationships that unfold slowly. Mentorships, long-term collaborations, trusted partnerships. These are not built in crowded rooms. They're built through repeated, meaningful interaction, through shared challenges, through reliability, through doing good work consistently. But networking culture rarely values consistency. It values novelty, new faces, new conversations, new opportunities. Introverts, by contrast, build power through continuity. They deepen what already exists instead of constantly expanding outward. This is why many introverts eventually realize that their most valuable network consists of very few people. But those few people know them well, trust them deeply, and are willing to advocate for them when it actually matters. That kind of advocacy is far more powerful than 100 weak ties. Yet traditional networking advice rarely mentions this. It talks about getting your name out there, not about becoming irreplaceable to the right people. It emphasizes presence over contribution, visibility over value. For introverts, this feels backward. Another reason networking feels like a scam is because it often ignores timing. Introverts tend to connect best when there's a reason to connect. A project, a question, a shared problem. Networking, by contrast, encourages connection for its own sake. You never know who might be useful. This instrumental mindset feels hollow to introverts. They prefer purpose-driven interaction. Introverts don't want to meet people just to meet people. They want context, meaning, a reason that goes beyond vague future benefit. This doesn't mean introverts don't care about opportunity. They do. They just approach it differently. They invest in becoming excellent at what they do, trusting that excellence will attract the right attention over time. This is slower, but it's also more aligned. And alignment matters more than speed. There's also an emotional cost to networking that rarely gets acknowledged. After forced social interaction, introverts often need significant recovery time. Not because the interaction was bad, but because it required sustained outward focus. This recovery time isn't laziness. It's neurological. Introverts process stimulation differently. Ignoring this leads to chronic exhaustion. When introverts push themselves to network constantly, they often sacrifice the very activities that make them valuable: deep work, creative thinking, focused execution. In trying to be more visible, they become less effective. That trade-off is rarely worth it. So when introverts say networking doesn't work for them, what they often mean is that the cost-benefit ratio is wrong. The energy spent outweighs the return, and over time, that imbalance breeds resentment, not growth. Another layer is authenticity. Networking often encourages you to present a polished version of yourself, an elevator pitch, a personal brand, a simplified narrative. Introverts value nuance. They don't like compressing their identity into a catchy summary. It feels reductive, inauthentic, like selling a version of themselves that doesn't capture what they actually offer. This creates internal resistance. You're asked to market yourself before you've been understood. And introverts know deeply that understanding takes time. Because of all this, many introverts eventually withdraw from networking entirely. They decide it's not worth the stress. But then guilt creeps in. Fear. The sense that they're sabotaging their future by opting out. That's where the scam really does damage. It convinces introverts that there's only one path to opportunity, and if they can't or won't walk it, they're doomed. But that belief is false. Introverts don't need to network more. They need to connect differently. They need environments where depth is rewarded, where listening matters, where contribution is visible over time, where trust grows organically. These environments exist, but they're quieter, less flashy, less talked about. Introverts thrive in spaces built around shared work rather than shared self-promotion. Research groups, small teams, long-term projects, niche communities, mentorship relationships. These don't look like networking, but they are networks, strong ones. The difference is that they're built on substance, not performance. When introverts focus on these forms of connection, something interesting happens. Opportunities still come, sometimes slower, sometimes less predictably. But when they come, they're better aligned, more sustainable, less draining. You're not constantly chasing the next contact. You're building something that attracts the right people naturally. This doesn't mean introverts should isolate themselves. It means they should stop forcing themselves into environments that consistently deplete them and start investing in contexts that support their strengths. Another thing introverts often overlook is that they already network, just quietly. Every time they do good work, every time they help someone thoughtfully, every time they listen deeply and respond with insight. These actions build reputation, and reputation is the most powerful form of networking there is. People talk, they remember, they recommend. But this kind of networking doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel strategic in the moment. It feels like simply doing what you value. Over time, though, it compounds. The loud version of networking promises fast results. The quiet version delivers lasting ones. If you're introverted, the real danger isn't that you won't network enough. It's that you'll burn yourself out trying to network the wrong way, that you'll abandon your strengths to chase someone else's formula for success. Staying connected to ideas like this matters because it reframes the entire conversation. It tells you that you're not failing at networking. You're resisting a model that doesn't respect how you operate. And staying subscribed isn't about rejecting connection. It's about staying aligned with approaches that don't require you to betray yourself to succeed. As you move forward, the most powerful shift you can make is internal. Stop measuring your success by how many people know you, and start measuring it by how well the right people know you. Stop chasing rooms and start deepening relationships. Stop performing availability and start building value. Networking, as it's usually sold, is a scam for introverts because it asks you to trade depth for exposure. And that's a trade introverts lose every time. But connection itself is not the scam. The scam is pretending there's only one way to build it. What introverts slowly discover, often through frustration, is that opportunity does not actually move the way networking culture claims it does. Opportunity does not travel through crowded rooms at random. It doesn't reward whoever shakes the most hands or speaks the loudest. Real opportunity moves through trust, and trust does not form instantly. It forms through repeated evidence of competence, integrity, and reliability over time. This is where introverts have a quiet advantage, even if it doesn't feel like one at first. Introverts tend to focus intensely on what they do. They refine. They think deeply. They care about quality in ways that aren't immediately visible. While others are busy circulating, introverts are often building, and building creates substance. Substance creates gravity. Gravity attracts attention without effort. But because this process is slow and mostly invisible, introverts often underestimate its power. Traditional networking sells immediacy. Meet the right person and everything changes. That story is seductive, especially when you feel stuck. But it's rarely true. Even when someone meets a powerful contact, nothing happens unless trust follows, and trust cannot be rushed. Introverts intuitively understand this, which is why they feel uncomfortable pretending otherwise. Another reason networking feels like a scam is because it externalizes control. It suggests that your future depends on access to the right people rather than on becoming someone worth seeking out. For introverts, whose confidence is often rooted in mastery rather than charisma, this message feels destabilizing. It shifts focus away from what they can control towards social maneuvering they don't enjoy. Over time, this creates a sense of helplessness. If I don't network, I won't succeed. That belief undermines self-trust. It convinces introverts that their natural way of operating is insufficient. But the evidence of real life often contradicts this belief. Look closely at how introverts actually advance. They become known for something specific. They solve hard problems. They contribute quietly but consistently. People begin to rely on them. Their names come up in conversations they're not part of. Recommendations happen behind closed doors. This is networking too. But it's reputation-based, not performance-based, and reputation is far more durable than visibility. Visibility fades quickly, reputation compounds. The tragedy is that many introverts abandon this natural path because it doesn't look like progress early on. There are no quick wins, no applause, no external reassurance. Meanwhile, extroverted networking produces immediate feedback, smiles, conversations, new contacts. Even if nothing comes of it later, it feels productive in the moment. Introverts are wired to value substance over sensation. But when surrounded by a culture that rewards sensation, it's easy to doubt yourself. That doubt is where the scam does its real damage. Another overlooked issue is that networking culture encourages comparison. Who knows more people? Who gets invited? Who's plugged in? For introverts, comparison is especially draining because they're already operating outside the dominant social mode. Constant comparison erodes confidence and creates pressure to perform. Performance for introverts is expensive. It costs energy. It costs focus. It costs authenticity. And the more you perform, the less you have left for the work that actually matters to you. This is why many introverts feel secretly relieved when networking plans get canceled. Not because they don't want connection, but because they're exhausted by forced interaction that leads nowhere. That relief is a signal. It's telling you something about alignment. Introverts are not antisocial. They are selectively social. They prefer fewer interactions with more meaning. Networking culture rarely respects that preference. It equates selectivity with weakness and volume with ambition. But ambition doesn't have to be loud. Some of the most impactful careers are built quietly, slowly, without constant self-promotion. Introverts often find their stride later, not because they're behind, but because their approach requires time to mature. This delayed visibility can feel discouraging in a culture obsessed with immediacy, but it often leads to greater stability long-term. When your position is built on actual value, it's harder to replace. When it's built on presence alone, it's fragile. Another reason networking feels hollow is that it rarely acknowledges introverts' need for psychological safety. Small talk with strangers requires emotional exposure without trust. For introverts, that exposure feels risky. Not dramatically, but subtly. It requires vigilance, reading cues, managing impressions. This constant self-monitoring is exhausting. When introverts engage in environments where safety is higher, one-on-one conversations, familiar settings, shared tasks, that vigilance drops. Energy returns. Authenticity emerges. This is where introverts shine. Networking events remove safety and replace it with urgency. So introverts aren't failing at networking, they're reacting appropriately to an environment that violates their psychological needs. Understanding this reframes everything. Instead of asking, "How can I network better?" the question becomes, "Where do I connect best?" And that question has very different answers. Introverts connect best where there is continuity, where interactions repeat, where trust has time to form, where contribution matters more than charm. These environments are quieter, less advertised, less glamorous, but they're real. And when introverts invest in them, they often find that networking as a problem disappears entirely. Opportunities arise naturally because they're embedded in ecosystems of trust. This is the introvert's version of leverage. Leverage doesn't come from knowing everyone. It comes from being essential to someone. Another subtle cost of networking culture is that it encourages extroverts to dominate conversations, while introverts fade into the background. Over time, introverts may internalize this and speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because the environment doesn't reward thoughtful contribution. This silencing is not benign. It deprives introverts of visibility for their ideas and deprives the group of insight. When introverts find spaces that value listening as much as speaking, they re-emerge. Their ideas land. Their presence matters. This contrast highlights how artificial networking environments really are. Introverts don't need louder voices. They need receptive rooms. Another truth rarely acknowledged is that networking often amplifies inequality. Those who already feel confident and socially rewarded gain more access. Those who don't are told to work on themselves. Introverts, who may already feel out of sync, are disproportionately affected. This creates a feedback loop where the same personalities dominate influence, while others contribute quietly without recognition. Calling this out doesn't make introverts bitter. It makes them honest. And honesty is where real strategy begins. For introverts, the most effective networking strategy is often invisible. It looks like mastery, like consistency, like being the person who delivers when others don't, like building something meaningful and letting it speak. This strategy doesn't eliminate social interaction, it reframes it. Instead of chasing attention, introverts create reasons for attention to come to them. That shift restores dignity. It removes the sense that success requires self-betrayal. It allows introverts to move forward without pretending to be someone else. If you're listening to this and feeling a sense of relief, that's not accidental. It means you've been carrying the quiet belief that something was wrong with you for not enjoying networking. Staying connected to perspectives like this matters because it dismantles that belief. And staying subscribed becomes less about more advice and more about staying grounded in approaches that honor who you actually are. Networking is not inherently evil, but the way it's marketed, as a universal solution, as a moral obligation, as the only path to opportunity, is misleading. For introverts, it often is a scam. Not because connection is fake, but because the version being sold ignores their psychology, their strengths, and their limits. The real work for introverts is not learning how to network louder. It's learning how to trust quieter paths, paths built on depth, on skill, on consistency, on integrity. Those paths take longer to reveal themselves, but when they do, they last. And once you understand that, you stop chasing rooms that drain you and start building lives that sustain you. That's when the pressure lifts. That's when resentment fades. That's when success stops feeling like an act. And that's when you realize that networking was never the point. Connection was, just not the loud kind.